Welcome to today's episode of the Women in Medtech series of the Medtech Business Academy podcast. I'm your host, Colleen Patterson, joined by Abby Norfleet and Barbara Strain. Also with us today is our special guest, Jennifer O'Reilly. Jennifer is the Vice President National Accounts for the Outpatient Division at Braun Medical. In her 25 years at Braun, Jennifer has held various positions over the years, including corporate training, sales management, and capital equipment. In her current role with Braun, she leads a team of directors that support large national and strategic customers. Additionally, Jennifer also sits on the board of directors for Professional Women in Healthcare, where she serves as chair for Corporate Partners Committee. Professional Women in Health is built upon a strong history of women leaders in the healthcare supply chain industry who continue to create a platform for progressive leadership and mentoring for the next generation. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
We are very excited to have you here. Sad to not be with us today is one of our other co-hosts, Stephanie. Stephanie Pitts is actually who introduced us to Jennifer. And when we were talking earlier this year about, hey, we need to have, who has some people that we know that has some great stories that really need to get out there. Stephanie could not have put her hand up any faster, Jennifer, to be like, my friend, Jen. She told us so many wonderful things about you and your background, being recruited from Braun right out of college to what you're doing now with Professional Women in Healthcare is incredibly exciting. So tell us a little bit about that board of directors position. I mean, everybody who's anybody knows the name Braun. So not to start there, let's talk about Professional Women in Healthcare, because when you and I chatted the other day, that was the first time I had ever heard about it as an organization. So let's give us a little bit of details about what that is and how you got involved.
And people who know me well know you do not need to twist my arm to talk about Professional Women in Healthcare. We refer to it as PWH, and I will say that has been the single largest catalyst in my growth and development in my career. I have met some really amazing women. If I were going to be in the foxhole, as they say, these are the type of women you'd want with you. They're capable, they're warm, they have creativity, really a lot of the core values that I noticed on your information is embodied here at PWH. So the goal for PWH is really a healthcare industry equally led by women. Mm-hmm. And our goal is to empower women to lead and succeed. So that means leadership development training, networking, education, really all the things that we know when you do them, they help your career. So it's been a wonderful experience for me, and I get to serve on their board. I'm fortunate to do that. And the committee that I work with, our job is to help find corporate partners who also believe in our mission and our vision, and to start those partnerships and then to keep them going.
How did you first hear about the organization?
Well, it's interesting. I call it a shoulder tap because there was a gentleman who's been in the industry a really long time, and he's tapped a lot of shoulders, but he had a relationship with Professional Women in Healthcare. And he said, and I was younger, this was 15 years ago, and he said, I really think you should get involved with this group. And I'm so grateful that he did. So it was really just somebody, looking in the ranks, saying who might have some potential and believing in me. So I try to do that for others wherever I can.
So I'm interested, Jennifer, I've been sort of PWH adjacent. I've not ever been a member, depending on where I sat at any given time. So for the audience, just a little bit of, when you dig a little deeper, it says in healthcare supply chain. Yeah. So can you explain what that really is as far as membership goes? I think that would be interesting just to start there so we can tee off of that.
I would love to. And I'm really glad you asked the question because when PWH first started, and I won't spoil the really fun story for any of you who end up joining, but there were a couple of women, names you would know in the industry, that were sitting in a meeting, and one of them looks at the other and goes, where are all the women? Right. And this was a long time ago. So that's it was born out of that. And then it became manufacturers and distributors. It sort of branched in those directions. So the women of the membership started off in manufacturing and distribution, but then started to evolve because we know that, healthcare is pretty big, right? So then we had GPO partnerships as well. And we have some very lovely and strong GPO partnerships. And now most recently, we're really focused on healthcare providers as well. One of the things that I noticed when I talked to a lot of the healthcare providers that I know, so that's health systems and a host of other things, clinicians included, is, I work for a manufacturer and I'm in sales. If you're in sales, you are going to be poked, prodded, tested, developed, and trained within an inch of your life, right? It's your norm. You constantly are getting feedback. You just are used to it. But what I noticed about some of my colleagues that were in healthcare, they didn't necessarily have access to growth and development in quite the same way that I did. And so we started asking some questions of our women in healthcare provider roles and found that, maybe they saw women in CNO positions or, things like that, but they just didn't have the same access to it. And so we're really excited to be partnering with IDNs and other groups to bring leadership development training because, our goal, we're focused on women, yes, but leadership training is universal.
Great.
One of the things that you had mentioned, Jen, when we had talked was about, and this is really teeing off of it's so important to be, doing leadership training is that, leadership, people are like, oh yes, anybody can move up in an organization. And a lot of times it's who has outlasted the people around you. And so, as you're talking about training and development, preparing to lead, what are some of the key steps for somebody who's looking to be like, I'm looking around and seeing this is not where I want to stay in my career. I know I want to be moving up that chain. What are some of the strategic insights or, where do people start?
So I would first, and I do have some thoughts on this. So I would first say that people underestimate the importance of stating your intentions. I cannot tell you how many conversations I've been a part of where somebody said, well, so-and-so wouldn't want to do that because of this, but we never asked so-and-so what they wanted. And so-and-so never told us what they wanted either. So if you want to move up, you have to tell people you want to move up. And it isn't, I know for some people that might feel forward, but people need to know what your goals are or they can't help you achieve them. And you won't be front of mind for them. So when they're picking task forces or special projects or leads, or they want to delegate something, if they don't know you're interested, you won't be top of mind for them when they're thinking about who should I give this project to for exposure. So I cannot overstate the importance of making your intentions clear. The other thing I would say is that don't wait for something formal. I think a lot of times we wait to be asked to join a leadership development program or selected, or, there has to be something formal that we're going to do and participate in. I would say that's great if you've got it. Certainly take advantage of it, but don't wait for it. Find your PWH. Make your own development program. Look at yourself and say, all right, I want to get here. And I know I'm pretty good in these areas. I think I need to get better in these areas. And what am I going to do about it? So really own that. And then I do things in threes. There's other things I could say, but I'll give you a third one, which is you need a stable of mentors. And they need to be varied. And they can't, they shouldn't all be formal, although formal mentors are great. I have some mentors that if I'm going to interview for a job, they are my first call. And maybe don't talk to them about every other problem in my life, but they're so valuable in that particular instance that they are always one of the people I call. So, formal and informal, mentors that are in the positions you want, mentors that are different from you. So really think about making acquisition of mentors a regular part of your life, really.
One of the things that you had mentioned in passing during one of our other calls, Jen, that I felt was really a perspective that I had never thought of, which seems so obvious that it's like, how did that not hit me, was the idea of even if you are interviewing for another position at your own organization, you should take that as seriously as if this was a brand new to you position and role. And I had never thought about that because so much of my career has been what has felt incredibly organic. Like, well, of course I'm going to get this promotion because that's the job that I've been doing. And I have stated my intention of this is the direction that I'm moving in. And so in the now, I started working at 14. So in the more years than I'd like to count, 20, 25, 26 years that I've been doing this, I don't know that I've ever interviewed formally within a position that I was in, or within an organization that I was in. It was just always a very like, of course I'm going to do that. So how, in those arenas, one of the things that we had also talked about was the idea of the non-promotable work, the invisible work that goes into your day-to-day, your tasks. Can you explain to our audience what that is, or give some examples of those types of situations? Because that's not helping you get up that ladder.
No, it's not. It's valuable. It needs to happen, non-promotable work. There was an article in Forbes, and I read it and I thought, well, that's just really interesting. It was written by a gentleman, and he was talking about the non-promotable work. And it really resonated with me because I was doing a lot of the non-promotable work, and I realized I really ought to cut it out, or at least spread it around a little bit more. That's things like, hey, would you take the meeting notes, or do you want to set that lunch up, or just the I'm going to run this report every month and be in charge of, setting up this agenda. I mean, they're all things that need to happen, but they should not always fall on the same individual or group of individuals. So I would say if you find yourself doing a lot of the non-promotable work, it's time to push back or find some other homes for it. I'm not saying never do it. Everybody has to do their share. And if you're in a leadership position, what I would say to you is, who's doing your non-promotable work, and can you have a hand in spreading that around? And I would even flip it and say, okay, now let's think about those high-profile projects, the things that people make their bones on, their name on, right? Are those always going to the same people? And who, maybe because they're just not wired to shoot their hand up for every single thing, or they're not front of mind, who could really bring some glory to a project that doesn't always get picked?
It's very, very feels to me like when you're doing a team project in college, that who gets the credit is a lot of times the person who speaks the most during the presentation, but many times that's not the person who actually did the lion's share of the work. That's the person who you couldn't get to do the work. And so what you assigned them was actually the thing that seemed that is the most visible. So there are ways in which, as we are working in teams, in groups, as we as leaders are choosing people to do the work, that making sure that we're balancing that, where we're getting different voices speaking, we're getting different eyes presenting, really can make a much more robust picture of where are we really. Abby, I see it feels like your brain is percolating there. What do you got on your mind?
Well, I think the question that I originally, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, Jennifer, but I think the audience might want to hear, what would be considered non-promotable work versus things that can get disguised as promotable work, but ends up being non-promotable work in the end. So, I mean, you said the note taking, or the setting up lunches and setting up of meetings, or even Colleen's example of being the project manager that helped assign certain roles and tasks and maybe did the lion's share of the work. But I think there's things that can sometimes be disguised as, oh, this is going to make me look really good, instead of, wait, it didn't quite give the same exposure or credit that the person that now suddenly got elevated because they just happened to be paired up with someone that had the backbone to kind of get it going. So I think it's important to kind of delineate between that. And I do think that women sometimes can fall a little bit more victim to that, because by nature, we're known to be more organized without trying to stereotype ourselves, or just willing to put our hand up of saying, yes, I'll go ahead and put that on too. We are the epitome of multitaskers. It is why we are designated as mothers for those of us that have children, all kinds of things that we take that on. So, what would you identify maybe to help the audience better understand as some of those things that it might have been something that you thought was going to make you look great, but instead it kind of might have held you back a little bit because you had more things on your plate that you weren't able to really focus and spend time on. This is what's really going to give me the visibility my leadership needs to see to know that I can take on that next role that I have my sights set on.
I love that question. And on my team, we have actually a phrase for it. We call it lane assist. When one of us is drifting out of our lane, we might hit them because,
Sure.
we want to continue to focus on our priorities, our strategic priorities, but we could also probably use that lane assist for what you're talking about as well. It makes me, here's what I thought about when you were asking that question. When individuals want to go move forward in their career, they tend to lean really heavily on work ethic and subject matter expertise, those two things.
Sure.
And those are not bad things. That's great. Mm-hmm. Those are fabulous things to have. And they're often what got us to where we are. But when you ask about what might be in disguise, it would be to continue to lead in those two ways, to be seen as like, I'm going to grind it out, or I know more than anybody on a certain topic. When we know the higher up the leadership food chain you go, usually the less you know about the day-to-day of how the work gets done. And there's a certain amount of that you should fix, right? Because you have to understand what you're leading.
You got to be able to open the PDF like this for 2025.
You need to be the person that is the subject matter expert in everything. And often when you're a leader, you can't be, because you're over too many things. So I think when people, you want to be that subject matter expert, but don't rely too heavily on that, on being the person that has to be involved or, leading every project around a certain thing. Because as you go up the chain, what your leadership is going to need to see is, can you lead others? Can you lead subject matter experts? Can you prioritize projects? Can you guide things when they're drifting out of their lane? It's not, do you know the most about this little widget? I've never been promoted based on knowing the most about a little widget or whatever. The widget can be anything. It's more, hey, do you understand how to prioritize and how to really be strategic and how to help guide a team? Not, do you know the most about it? So I think that's also in disguise. And people think it makes them promotable, but it does not always.
I had an interesting situation that kind of backs up to this. Is the best compliment I ever received was when someone said, I'm just having difficulty with this particular person. You know how you pass people on in organizations? So I would be the give it to Barbara person. So, and then we just blossom this individual and they go, ooh, how's that working out? And we said, it's great. And they wind up doing, so this happened more than one time. So it's just not about, me or whatever, but it's the culture that you breed around you. And it's also that sort of succession planning in a way as well, so that leaders should be doing that to those around them. So those are great examples.
Yeah, I wanted to tap into kind of off of what you just said on the succession planning, Barbara, and some of the things that you were saying, Jennifer, to, help people, I guess, identify if they're being pulled into those in disguise non-promotable items. Would be if you are that person that's constantly getting tapped as saying, hey, I appreciate that, but knowing that where your peers also are and where their expertise might be, and not being afraid to say, I can give you my quick opinion or participate in that, but pass that on to maybe one of your other peers that is needing more exposure, that doesn't quite often get that as well. And that kind of helps breed into what I would think kind of that succession planning. One of the things that I have seen others, and probably something that I fell victim to at some point in my career, has been getting so entrenched in that all of a sudden you're doing everything and trying to be everything to everyone, that you're also forgetting about the fact of, if I were to be lifted up out of where I am right now, panic might ensue, because people are kind of saying, well, what's next after that? And not to put yourself up on that pedestal, but you're almost doing yourself a disservice versus kind of creating that team of, when you do decide to step into that next level, knowing you're going to continue to be supported the exact same way you were supporting others that allowed you to have that freedom. So, I mean, what other advice would you have for people in that regard that maybe seem to have a little bit of a struggle letting go of that piece, or even delegating to free them up a little bit?
I mean, sometimes I think it's even just more of a perspective shift, because people don't like to say no. They like to be helpful. People like to be needed. And I have coached people with this before. They love to help, but a couple of things happen when you're the one who's always doing it. Number one, if you say yes to everything, you're not giving all of your projects and your priorities the focus that they deserve and you would probably want to give them. So there is that. And when I phrased this to a certain individual, I said, you're also robbing someone else of a chance to learn. You're taking that away from them. And that is not sustainable. That, your job is to leave your team, your groups better than you found them. Mm-hmm. So I push myself. I need to continue to push myself to delegate in a intentional way, not just to get work off my plate, but to think about, well, what would help? This is something that I don't need to be the person that does it. Who could benefit from working on this? And again, I think people a lot of times just don't like to say no. So I think it's, hey, my plate's pretty full at the moment, but who would be great for this? Because you haven't said no to them. You've given them support for their question, their project, whatever. It just wasn't you. And it doesn't always have to be you.
Right? One of the things, we're really talking a lot about the talent pipeline right now, like, maturing people in their talent pipeline, maturing yourself. And as, going back to what Abby was saying, and then building on to Jen, what you just said, what is sitting in the back of my mind is the number of times that I've heard people who say, I got passed over for this opportunity because they said I was too valuable in the job that I'm in. And one of the things when I'm coaching that I ask is, are you doing the job that you're hired for? Or are you doing other people's jobs? Because can you be more valuable doing the job of 3 people than your own job? Yes. And a lot of that is you don't know when to say no. And then that leads ultimately to the burnout, to the fatigue, to, that discontent, where if you learned a better understanding of the boundaries of, to Jen's point, if you're reframing, because it's hard to say no, to be like, oh no, or I don't want to burden somebody else. Like, I'll just do this, but it's a non-sustainable pace. And I think one of the phrases that you just used of we're robbing other people of the opportunity to learn is really a way to change that realm of thinking to say, it's incredibly valuable to say, hey, I can't write that for you, but if you put it together, I'll give you feedback on it. Like we got to start doing some of that pushback of it can't all be me. You got to swim too.
It can't all be anybody. It can't all be anybody.
Right.
And the other thing I would say too is I cannot think of any time I was promoted. And you talk about not having to interview. I've interviewed for every promotion ever. We're very big on interviewing. I don't know if it's a company culture thing or what, but I've done a lot of interviewing and I've never had an interview or go for a promotion where one of the questions was, so who will take your job when you move on? Who have you gotten ready to come into place for you? So that's my responsibility to look on my team and go, who are the people that could fit in these roles? So that's succession planning also. And you owe that to them, and you owe that to organization, and you owe that to yourself.
So otherwise you just leave this sort of void, which is always hard. And I think Abby was sort of alluding to that a few minutes ago and things. But one of the things I wanted to ask is, what happens when you do all these things and the last step to take is that individuals sort of take it and they just are afraid? So how do you boost that up? How do you mentor people to be more confident and really do want to step into a position?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, some of it's individual, right? I would also say one of the things I see happen is people don't start thinking about that until it's time for all the moves to be made. And really, this should be an ongoing conversation that happens before any job's posted or any opportunity. This should just be regular part of cadence with those on your team and those around you. If our topic today is talent, you should always be looking for it all the time, always scanning for talent and, getting them thinking about potential moves, because there are people that are either nervous about stepping forward, or the other thing I see a lot is they had in their mind one job that is their next step, and their field of vision is too narrow. Mm-hmm. And so why I say that you shouldn't be having this conversation right before everybody is about to play musical chairs and switch seats. This has to be a long-term discussion. And a lot of times when I mentor people that are earlier in their career, I'm encouraging them to widen the possibility field and not go, well, I'm this, and so my next job is to be the job my boss is sitting in. And I encourage them to think about what work makes them happy, what work are they good at doing, what work would they find challenging, and look for that in a variety of places within the organization, which is really going to widen, I don't know about you all, but we've got lots of people at the organization and only so many leadership roles. So you want to have as many of them open to you as a possibility as you can. And if you're only thinking about going to the job over yours, then you better get that one or you're not going to move up very fast.
Kind of might get stuck. That reminds me of one of my mentors once told me. She said, you have to sometimes look at your career trajectory as it's not a straight line up, but it's a little bit more of a jagged line as it's trending upwards. And so while maybe sometimes your next role isn't going to necessarily be completely to that next level of what you might want in a promotion, what it's going to do is give you a little bit more of that expansion of skill set, because you don't know what you're accidentally pigeonholing yourself in. If you're just like, well, that's more considered a lateral move in the hierarchy of things without really paying attention or giving credit to that skill set that they're going to open themselves up to. And I think to your point, a lot of people do get really focused on that is, all right, well, I did this for this long. It's just only natural that now I'm going to step into this next role without really paying attention to where their blinders are and how they can sometimes get stuck spinning their wheels, so to speak.
There's a woman at PWH. She's at Owens and Minor, but she's a past chair of PWH, Vicki Lyle. And Vicki always says, I'm going to give Vicki credit where it's due. Your career isn't a ladder, it's a lattice. You can go a lot of different directions. And there's reasons for all of them. So I love that you said that because it reminded me of Vicki. Yeah. She's very wise.
I love that analogy. That's a good one.
Something that actually just came up between myself and one of my mentors literally earlier this week is we were talking about the idea, and this is very in line, Abby, with what you're talking about, the idea of like you should, the natural progression is this next seat. And we were talking about that and about the idea of, what happens when you get there and you realize it wasn't what you were expecting. And I think that, Jen, to your point of like, you get this idea of the blinders of like, well, it has to be this, like, this has to be the next seat because that's the seat my boss was sitting in, or like, it obviously makes sense. And that, I think this really goes back to the idea of that larger ongoing conversation where you're asking yourself those hard questions of, what is it that I enjoy doing? Where is it that I want to be? What does my idea of my work-life balance look like? What type of organization do I want to be in? Because it's very easy to get trapped in the sense of, well, the logical next step is. Whereas if you're thinking about it like a lattice, where you're like, my next step doesn't have to be the step in front of me. It could be in all of these different directions. Because I think that there is something to be said for the number of people that get to a certain level, look around and are like, this sucks. Like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be doing this. And then, that attitude permeates to the people around them. And you don't even realize, like, that's what broke down the culture. Is that you let that person keep rising to the point where they're no longer happy or qualified. And that's been a lot of the way that corporate America has moved people forward. You move up until you are physically not actually very good at your job so that you can't keep going. So you get a lot of people who are in there who shouldn't be there, who aren't happy, who are not making things as good as it could be. And, for tenure, but also from not having that self-reflection of, is this even right for me?
So if you are a leader and you're having career conversations with anybody, people you're mentoring, people on your team, you need to ask them why. So if they're saying, I want to move to this spot next, why? What's motivating you to do that? And if you're yourself, you should ask yourself why also, because I talk to people and they're like, well, I'm going to go for this job. Well, why are you going to go for that job? Well, it's the next job. Okay, well, let's just take a step back. What motivates you? So if you're in an individual contributor position and your work directly translates to a commission check, I mean, in the world of sales, that's normal. Mm-hmm. And then you want to go to region management. Why? Why do you want to do that? If you're super money driven, maybe that's not your best move. If you really like to coach and develop and problem solve, maybe it is a good next move. So you've got to really ask yourself, why are you pursuing something? And you should ask others as you're having conversations for them, if this is something you're stating that you want to do, what's driving it? So that they really understand their motivations and don't, I mean, I've seen people go up the chain to the next step and then not be happy because it really doesn't align with what makes them tick.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's something to be said too about those that are in individual contributor roles that suddenly want to step into management roles because they just think that by nature, oh, I'm really good at this role as an IC. I'm going to be great at the management role. And what they're forgetting is all of a sudden you're inheriting 10 different personalities that you have to manage, including and not just your own, which sometimes managing my own personality on a day-to-day basis is a challenge in and of itself. So how do you have those conversations with those individuals and helping them understand, making that jump between you've been really great as an independent contributor. Let me give you a little bit of a preview of what you're potentially signing up for as you're now going to take on the responsibility of managing and developing your own team.
I mean, I think to start, that's exactly what you do is you say, share with you a little bit about why day-to-day life looks like. Not all players make good coaches.
Okay.
And there's another reason that I talk about being a subject matter expert doesn't, just because you knew a lot and you were very good at an individual contributor subject matter expert role does not mean you would be a good leader. Those are different skill sets. They might have some overlap, but we think that if you're really good in this, it's automatically going to translate into this. And it's not always the case. So the first thing, if I were talking to somebody, I would want them to really know what it looks like to be a leader. How much of your time do you actually have to work on your own stuff versus how much of your time are you spending helping others advance priorities and solve problems and things like that? Do you enjoy getting work done through others? Because the other thing I see a lot is you take an individual contributor who's used to being the doer. Well, as you go up the ladder in leadership, you're not really the doer, you're the guider, you're the many other words, but you're not necessarily the doer. And if you try to be a leader as a doer, there are situations that call for that. But if by and large, you're the get stuff done person and you jump in and want to do everything, I don't think you'll make a very effective leader. So those are the kind of conversations I would at least explore with that individual.
Plus, they also need to understand that the whole thing about the 80% of your time will probably be spent on 20% of the people. And this is why my hair looks like this. But, those are the things too. So it's just not always the good stuff, but it's how do you relate? And maybe you need to wait and take some different courses and shadow people or whatever. So I think the mentoring can be a lot of different looks depending on what it is. Because I think maybe we'll all agree, but in healthcare, when you see someone doing a great job at the bedside or in the laboratory or respiratory, they'll make a really great leader. And then you see so many times that they get there and they're frustrated because it's not a good fit. So this is such a great topic.
And it's harder than it looks, by the way. It's really hard to be a leader. Even when you have all the talent and the desire and the drive, it's a hard job. Not everybody can do it. So
it is a hard job. And, the longer I've spent in my career, the more and the higher you go in a position, the more you realize that, I was the consummate, the individual contributor. And, when I really started moving into leadership, real leadership, now the better part of a decade ago, that was a challenge. And I found a lot of job dissatisfaction with the idea of loss of control. Because I used to be in control of my destiny. I used to be in control of my day. I used to be in control of all of the outcomes. And then when you move into an area where it's herding cats, and that is actually a great analogy of now when I look back at it, I know I was not doing good because I was herding cats. I didn't have purpose. I didn't have the skills to be able to get the team together so that everybody's, in the boat. And then the people are in the boat in chairs, and then the people are in the boat in chairs, and we got oars in the water. Then we got boat in the chairs and the oars in the water, and everybody's pointed the same way so we can actually go somewhere. And that, I mean, even I myself fell into that of like, well, obviously because I'm good at this, that means I'm going to be good at that. And there were years where I sat in the coxswain of the boat and was not good at that. And it really did take a lot of work and effort to realize that I needed to bring a better me to the table. It wasn't the team that was the problem. I was the problem. You didn't have good direction. You didn't have somebody being like, hey, by the way, we're not pointed in the right direction. You're not all facing the same way. And that is really the ethos of leadership, is that when you are in a position where you are far enough away from the day-to-day work that you can see the bigger picture, you can see who's not facing the right direction. And then it's you who has to help get that person aligned. And so if you're in a position right now where you feel like you are herding cats, one finger pointing out, four fingers pointing back at me, and most likely you are the problem. I was the problem.
You know what also happens though is really successful individual contributors, at least the ones I've talked to, and I myself thought, well, this is, I'm operating at this caliber. This is how I believe the job should be done. Surely everybody's doing this, whatever this is. And what I noticed, and what other people notice when they're new to leadership is, oh no, that's not what happens.
No,
just because you would conduct yourself in a certain way with, expectations of yourself and goals you're trying to meet, that isn't necessarily the case for everybody else. So sometimes that takes people a little bit aback. So what I think can be the challenge when you go into leadership is you go, okay, not everyone did things the way I did. That's okay.
Right.
Here's what I try to focus people on: the outcomes and the non-negotiables. So can you get the best out of the people that you're leading, allowing them to be themselves? There's always going to be things that are like, listen, we have to do this. This is coming down from on high. We just have to do it, and it has to be done this way. There are times for that. We're all going to have a monthly call. That's happening. But, in between, can you flex as long as your stated objectives for your year, your organization are being met? You got your non-negotiables, you got your outcomes. Can you flex in between to let people kind of work the way that they need to work? And then when you do that, I do think you start to see things come out that if you really tried to force them down your own path, maybe never would have come out, and they maybe would have been really great too.
The generational thing that we keep learning about over the years is they all have a different sort of goal in mind. And you're right. You've got to figure out and let them do it at the pace or the mindset or what's working for them, as long as we get to the goal.
Yeah.
Changing that mindset from, is it a sprint or is it a marathon? And I would rather have dependable marathon runners with me than people who can sprint 20 yards at a time and then have to take, the next week off for recovery.
So you never know. You never know when you might get lost on that sprint and suddenly you're doing, a little bit of adding 3 miles onto that run you weren't planning on. So probably not the best running analogy. That's why I don't run. But yeah, same thing. So, you want the resiliency and the ability for someone to stick it out as well as you're kind of going through, instead of just kind of going through that. Jennifer, one of the things you said was you made the comment of doing it the way that I did it. And I do think that is something that a lot of new managers also fall victim to is, and they're often told, no one's going to do things the way you did them. And I think sometimes people can take that phrase and turn that into, that's right, I am so great, no one's going to be as great as I was. And then that leads to a lot of frustration versus, no, actually, there's more than one way to do it. And allowing yourself to pull out of that day-to-day stuff. Colleen, when you were talking about, some of your early days, I definitely think I made a lot of those same mistakes too. And it's, hey, I know what worked for me. It has to work for everybody else.
Obviously,
while I'm the same person, I'm the same person to admit this is also personality management. I think that is just a lot of leadership in general, is learning and knowing your personalities that you have within your toolbox, and knowing how to make all those personalities row that boat in the right direction. So it's been probably one of the best learnings that I've ever had, that has been able to make its way through not just my professional career, but also just within my personal life as well. Suddenly you just stop caring about such like little things as much, and it allows you to see that big picture more often. So it's been fun to see, but I feel for some of those new managers now whenever I see some of those mistakes being made, and it's like, oh, I want to save you, but sometimes you need to let them figure it out on their own, I guess.
Yeah. That really letting people, as I just had that conversation with a member of my team, and they were like, I see this happening. And I'm like, yeah, I see it happening too. But we're talking about somebody, and we've already tried to save them 3 different times. And they've said, I am dead set on bashing my head against this wall. And I was like, you got to let them bash their head against the wall. You got to let it hurt. And it's really hard to say that as a leader, as somebody who cares about the people. But sometimes the growing pain of like, yeah, that wasn't a great choice, was it? That will teach them a better lesson than you trying to safeguard them up front. And I think one of my favorite phrases from my really early days of "you're not doing this the way that I would" was, they were like, well, have you know Whitney Houston, right? I was like, everyone knows Whitney Houston. She's like, one of her best songs is "It's Not Right, But It's Okay." Like, just like, you're stuck on "it's not right." Right is your way, Colleen, but is it okay? Did it get the job done? And I was like, yes.
But you know what? That was a huge learning experience for me as well, because I am a self-proclaimed perfectionist, as a lot of successful people are. But guess what? That's not very efficient. And you really have to get comfortable with, is it most of the way right? Or is it 80% there? Is it 90% there? That's good enough. Move on and give your talents to the next thing, because that 10% does not materially change the outcome of your project. If it does, great, keep going. But most of the time it does not. And knowing when to just sort of let go was really hard for me. And I see other people, have some of the same thing as well.
Being a nurse by trade, one of the analogies I use is, okay, can I deal with some scraped knees and elbows or even a broken bone, but I can't deal with a decapitation. So figure out how to manage that risk a little bit.
Good triage.
Yeah.
We are at the top of our time today, so we do have to wrap it up. I have to say, I feel like I could sit here and, we have still so many things that we didn't even go into that we could talk about of, in the hiring landscape that it is today. How do you find the cream of the crop, or, some other tips and tricks for preparing yourself for that next role. So I am sad that we have gone through our time so quickly. So Jennifer, do not be surprised if I bring you back on in the future to be like, well, we've got more to say. It has been a really terrific episode. I think that, really this deep dive into what it means to be a leader, preparing yourself for that, taking a hard look at what you're bringing to the table and what you're trying to achieve as you grow and develop in your career and, in true leadership, those of the people around you. It is the bigger picture from everybody. Has been such a fantastic conversation. Jennifer, you have been so wonderful to have on today.
Thank you.
For our audience, if you've not already done so, be sure to subscribe so that you never miss a future episode of the Medtech Business Academy. And we really thank you for joining us today.